Okay. You guys ready? Thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening to our debate for the candidates for the various offices within the Meriden legislative delegation. I'm Mike Savino. I'm local and state news editor at the Record Journal. We're proud to co-sponsor this event along with the Midstate Chamber of Commerce, also the Meriden Board of Ed. Thanks to them for lending us this space. So we hope tonight to ask some informative questions, help you understand these candidates, where they stand, and also help you make the decisions that you're going to be making on November 6th when you go to the polls. Certainly that's what we view our role as a newspaper, and so this is certainly very much within our mission, we believe, to help inform you as participants within our democracy. Tonight's debate, the format will be that each race will focus about 25 minutes or so within each race, each district. The way it'll work is the two candidates will answer the same question. The first candidate will have 90 seconds, then the other candidate will have 60 seconds to respond. They will alternate taking questions. So in this race, Mary Doherty Abrams, the Democratic nominee, will go first. Senator Len Suzio, the Republican nominee, will go second. Then they will flip. And it'll work the same way for each of the races. For the three-way race, we will have an order where everybody gets a turn to go first. Our panelists for this evening are Matt Zabrick. He's a staff writer at the Record Journal. He covers Meriden City Hall and Meriden politics. He's been with us since 2016, and prior to covering Meriden, he also covered Wallingford. We also have attorney Tom Walsh. He's a principal attorney at Updike, Kelly, and Spellacy in Hartford. He's a past director of the Midstate Chamber of Commerce, and he's currently the president of the Meriden Economic Development Corporation. So we will now jump to the, also after, I should mention, after we get through the question and answer portion, each of the candidates will have 90 seconds to make closing remarks throughout the night. Our intern Andreas, he's over there keeping time. He'll have a red folder that he'll hold up when time expires just to make sure everybody sees it. Obviously, I will also cut you off. Listen, there's a game tonight, so we're running a tight ship here, okay? So we had a coin toss before we started to set the order. As I mentioned, Mary will go first, Len will go second. Just to introduce this race, Len Suzio is currently the senator. He was elected to the seat in 2016. He's the co-chair of the legislature's Children's Committee. He also sits on the Transportation Committee and the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Mary Doherty Abrams is the Democratic nominee. This is her first run for office, but she's certainly been involved in Meriden for some time. With that, Andreas, are you ready?
Is there a time limit on the questions themselves?
Mercifully, no.
Okay. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. And although I'm asking questions on behalf of the business community, the elephant that's in the room for this race, and perhaps for races to come, and which will affect every issue that we'll be talking tonight about tonight and maybe in future sessions, is our budget deficit. Most experts believe that whoever comes into office will have a $4.5 billion budget deficit, which is over 20% of the state budget, to deal with in the next budget. The state, unlike the federal government, must balance its budget each year. And although the governor proposes the budget, it's the General Assembly, of which you will be a part, that sets the budget. What is your idea to fix this gaping hole? Specifically, we want to know what specific areas, to restrict spending and increase revenue, specific areas to cut, reduce, or eliminate, and what revenue generation do you see?
Mary?
Thank you, Tom. I think there's only one way to approach the budget deficit, and that is, excuse me, I'm sorry, do we need to turn this to us as we
Yeah, that would help.
Okay, thank you. I think there's only one way to approach the budget deficit, and that's by building our economy. And the way we build our economy and make it stronger is by educating a workforce that's ready to work, by having a quality of life here in Connecticut that attracts people and makes them want to stay here and work, that makes corporations want to be a part of our state. And I think that's really the biggest way to approach it. But to answer more specifically to your question, I think there are other ways to raise revenue in this state. I think that our income tax structure needs to be looked at to become more equitable in charging people of the wealthiest in this state to make them pay a little bit more, not a lot, but they need to pay a little bit more to make it equitable. I also think that we need to look at alternative sources of revenue, maybe perhaps sports betting, or, I know there's other things that have been thought of. I think we need to look at our pension programs, obviously. And there's been some really innovative ideas around those that I find most attractive. Currently, they're looking at whether or not to move some state assets into our pension fund and how that might affect that liability that we currently hold. So I think that there's still a lot that we can do, but most importantly, if everyone's prospering, our deficit will take care of itself.
Just a second.
Well, thank you. You gave me a question I could take 2 hours to answer, and I got to do it in 60 seconds. Well, first of all, I can begin by what we can't and shouldn't do. Not another tax increase on top of the tax increases we've had for the last umpteen years. Connecticut is experiencing an exodus of people from the state and businesses who won't come to the state because of the tax burden in the state. So, in my opinion, tax increases are off the table. What we've got to do is do it the way that every one of you in this audience does, which is you've got to tighten the belt. You've got to look where you can cut costs. And one thing that happened in the bipartisan budget that was passed a little over a year ago was we looked at the CBAC agreement. And the CBAC agreement, as we all know, was extended out to 2027. But we looked at the potential for adjusting the benefits after that point in time, like 46 other states do. And by doing that, we saved over $300 million in the current this current biennium. And we're obviously going to have to look at other things. I had proposed what I call the Citizens in Need Fund, which would be a tax deduction, but would generate 10 times the revenue of the tax loss. And unfortunately, I don't have the time to explain that. I guess I'll keep this here.
Yeah, keep the mic because the next question goes to you, Matt.
Oh. Yeah, just staying on the budget.
1 second.
So staying on the budget, the current deficit has been largely caused by past governors and legislatures failing to fund pension costs for both teachers and state workers. Do you propose to fully pay these costs going forward, and how?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand the last part of that question. Do you propose what? What was that again?
Do you propose to fully pay these expenses going forward, and how?
Okay. The budget deficit is actually caused by two things. One is the skyrocketing expenses that's related to underfunding of the pension and retirement liabilities of the state. But the other thing that's causing it is Connecticut's economy has been shrinking. Connecticut's economy is back where it was in 2004. 14 years later, we're doing the same amount of economic activity we did in 2004. It's a perfect storm. Decreasing revenues because of a shrinking economy and exploding expenses because we ignored and didn't properly fund our liabilities as we should have, all not for the last 5 years, but for the last 30 years. So addressing that has got to recognize the two underlying problems that are causing the crisis that we're in. And by the way, I want to say, I think this is by far the most serious financial crisis in the state's history. We're staring at a $4.5 billion deficit next year. My opponent is right in terms of the economy, but the problem is we can't turn the economy around in a year's time. And next year, we're going to be staring at this big deficit, and we won't have the benefit of any kind of economic growth that's caused by a change in our policies, because we won't even have time to pass them until next year. So our only option is to look at tightening the belt next year, and that means we have to look at things like, again, having a CBAC deal that benefits state employees and benefits taxpayers at the same time. A deal that the employees can rely on, rather
Len,
than this
time.
deal that exists right now, which is not worth the paper it's printed on, and therefore the state employees aren't getting a fair share or a fair shake. Mary.
Thank you. I believe in fully funding the pension for state employees and for teachers. Mr. Suzio mentioned the bipartisan budget, but I would like to make it clear that Mr. Suzio voted against the bipartisan budget. So I don't really know that he can take responsibility for any of that. The budget that he voted for raised the teachers' contributions to their pension fund and then put it into the general fund rather than into the teacher fund, which is not going to help the pension situation. I think that the state employees have come back to the table 3 times since 2009. They have tried to help the state in any way they can and have even saved the state up to $24 billion in the last time they came to the table. So I want to respect the fact that these are working people who have been promised a contract and yet have come back again and again to try to make things work. And I think that we have to honor that and honor them and keep the promises that we made.
I just want to take 30 seconds. Len, I know you wanted to address a comment there.
Yeah, I want to point out that I did vote for a bipartisan budget. It was the bipartisan budget that was vetoed by the governor. Subsequent to that, another budget was approved with bipartisan support.
I would say that
Mary, I'll give you 30 seconds when Len is done. So.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that was what I was speaking of, and that had the $321 million of savings. There's no doubt that we have an obligation to the state employees. I'm not denying that at all. But it's an obligation that's got to be realistic and one that the state employees can count on.
Mary, you can also have 30 seconds.
It's my understanding, and certainly anyone can fact check this, that the Republicans put forward a budget. It was not a bipartisan budget. It was a Republican budget that Senator Suzio voted on. That was then vetoed by the governor, and then a bipartisan budget was reached. That is my understanding, and I'm pretty clear I'm right about it.
So, okay.
The confusion is that there were 2 bipartisan budgets. Okay, that's all.
There was a budget that Republicans proposed that was adopted with support from some Democrats.
Right.
It was vetoed. There was then a proposal.
Right.
There was then a budget put forward that got overwhelming support from both. And if I'm not mistaken, Len, you did vote against that
That's
version.
right. I did vote against that one. Yeah, it had 17 tax hikes and fee increases in it.
Okay. Next, we're moving on.
Okay.
The next question goes back to Mary. Tom?
Yes. As a newcomer to this position, and in light of these budget issues, what experience and capacity do you bring to address the current state budget deficit or to be involved in the apparent likelihood of restructuring of the state government that we will most likely experience over the next budget cycles as a result? In other words, what's your skill set?
That's an excellent question. I think I bring a skill set from my career, the fact that I've had a family, raised, been a homeowner and done all the responsible things in my life. But career-wise, I've been an educational leader for over 12 years. I have balanced budgets in those responsibilities. I have advocated for groups of people. I have been at the table and in the room where decisions are made, difficult decisions having to do with what's going to happen to children. And so I know what it's like to make those kind of decisions and know that you have a fiduciary responsibility to those people who give you the money. So I don't think it takes experience up at the Capitol. I think exactly the opposite. I think we need people up there with some fresh blood and some fresh ideas to look at things with a fresh eye and make some decisions about what could happen in the best interest. But also, because of my background, I know how to be compassionate at the same time, and I think I have the values of what's really important in making those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next year, we're staring at a $4.7 billion deficit, and we're obligated under the CBAC agreement. We can't lay off any state employees. So what are we going to do? We have to raise taxes, a record-breaking amount yet again. I have a background in economics and finance and accounting. I've been on the Finance Revenue Bonding Committee as well as on the Appropriations Committee, so I've had 2 years of experience on both. very familiar with the budget and its ins and outs. And I think that is a big advantage that I bring to the Capitol. I had proposed last year and the year before a novel idea called the Citizens in Need Fund, which would be a charitable fund to help the state meet the social services needs of its constituents, and yet provide a tax deduction for people who wanted to contribute to it. It would bring in 10 times the revenue of any tax costs associated with it. That was the opinion of the Office of Fiscal Analysis and the top tax experts in the state. That's the kind of creative thinking we're going to need to get the state out of the mess it's in. Thank you.
Matt, your question for Len?
Yep. How should Connecticut pay for transportation initiatives? If you're against tolls, what other options do you propose?
The quote, the need for tolls was predicated on this two things. It was predicated on the idea that the Special Transportation Fund was running out of money because of decreasing tax collections and the gas taxes, because of decreasing consumption of gas. That's blatantly untrue. From 2013 to 2018, the consumption of gasoline and motor fuels sold in Connecticut, including diesel fuel, increased by 88 million gallons per year. So the very first argument for tolls turns out to be totally fallacious. The second thing is it was all predicated on a $100 billion spending plan put forward by Governor Malloy over 30 years that was never vetted by anybody, even the Transportation Committee on which I sit. That is a preposterous amount of spending. It's triple the amount that was being spent on an annual basis when Governor Malloy first came into office, and it's triple the amount for 30 consecutive years, not for 4 or 5 or 6 years to make up for the neglect of our roads and bridges. So it's a plan that was greatly exaggerated. The Republicans came up with a plan called Prioritize Progress Connecticut, which basically allowed for doubling the spending on roads and bridges, and it didn't require any tolls or an increase in the gas tax at all. That's the way to go. It'll pay for itself without a single toll or the need to increase gas taxes by a penny. Thank you.
Let me speak first to the Republican plan. What Senator Suzio isn't sharing with you is that would take bonding into the general fund out of the Special Transportation Fund. And when you read the plan, which I have done, they talk about the fact that they will cut excess waste in other bonding areas. They never explain what that excess waste is. Now, in their Republican budget that they put forward, what they found as excess waste in that was DCF, programs for young children. So my question is, what would be the excess waste here? But to answer your question more specifically, Matt, I found as I've been knocking on doors and talking to people that the toll issue is really divided. And the reason it is, I think, is because there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think people are thinking everything from there will be tolls on every road, including the Berlin Turnpike, to the fact that they'll only be on the borders, to everything in between. And I don't believe in the $10 million study that Malloy put forward. I think we have the information needed, and what we need is an actual plan to put in place to say what revenue will this incur and what will it mean to the citizens of the state. Thank you for letting me finish.
Tom, before we get to you, we were asked readers to submit questions before tonight's debate, so I'd now like to read one of those. This one came from Sue Berkstead, and this will go to Mary Abrams first.
Yeah, 'cause you're too.
How would you personally encourage the growth of local business?
I'm sorry, can you say that
Sure.
again?
How would you personally encourage the growth of local business?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have that, again, was cut in the Republican budget is the Small Business Assistance Plan, and I think that things like that really work in reaching out to people. I recently spoke at a Chamber of Commerce, and what I realized after talking to them is that a lot of business owners know what they need. What they need is someone in government that's going to listen to them and act on what they're requesting. So I think that's really one thing. I think the other thing to really get small business, for instance, we're moving there with transportation in the new train hub that we have in Meriden. So we're going to start to get people down here. If we get more innovative and get workspace sharing and allow people that are doing more innovative small businesses to come into the state and support them, I think they want a quality of life that we can provide to them if we show them that it's available. So those are some some of the things that I think really help in building small businesses. And lastly, you need to have a workforce available for them. I think we have one of the best education systems in this country, and I think we have to continue to grow on that strength and make sure that we're planning for kids and getting them ready for what's needed in the workplace as we move forward. And that includes the different trades that are available too. So I think all of that works together. We have to educate our kids, we have to give them incentives to be here, and produce a quality of life that attracts business here.
Thank you. I myself am a small business owner. I grew up in a business family. When I was in banking, I worked with entrepreneurs and businesses throughout the state for years. People who are growing their businesses. I've seen thriving businesses who have succeeded. But times have changed in Connecticut. We've become a state that's got a bad reputation for being unfriendly to businesses. And a lot of that's got to do not only with the tax burden, but it's got to do with the regulatory burden that we have here in Connecticut. I addressed the need for capital with a program I called the First 5,000 program, which was a program to take state pension fund money and take $1 billion of it and make it available for SBA guaranteed loans to small businesses. Those are full faith and credit obligations to the U.S. government, so it would not be at risk at all to the pension fund money we have. It would take pension fund money, state pension fund money, and actually focus it on the business community here in Connecticut, and take it away from being invested overseas. So I think it's a good, innovative way to do things, and we ought to try it next year.
Sure. Tom, your question, which now goes to Len first.
Yes, since we opened up the transportation issue, we'll get back to economic development.
Oh,
But
good.
there is another constitutional question on the ballot. There's two of them, but the one that I'm talking about is that there's a constitutional amendment to provide for a lockbox for the Special Transportation Fund. And do you support it? And do you think that gasoline tax and any toll revenue that is ultimately decided on, if it is, which should be dedicated to this fund and not used for a purpose other than for transportation?
At first glance, the idea of a transportation lockbox sounds very, very appealing, because we all know the history of the state where the transportation fund has been raided by the legislature year in and year out. And in fact, the legislature was so anxious to grab money from the Special Transportation Fund that it intercepted money before it even got into the Special Transportation Fund. So sometimes you'll hear from people on the other side of the aisle saying, oh, we didn't raid the Special Transportation Fund. It's greatly exaggerated by the Republicans. Well, they're true, they're correct, but they're incompletely correct, and they're very misleading by saying that, because what the legislature did between 2007 and 2014 was we took $1.2 billion from the petroleum gross receipts tax before it got to the Special Transportation Fund, and they diverted it right into the general fund. So, you know, the lockbox is an apparent way to stop the legislature from doing that. But you know what? We had a constitutional spending cap that went back to 1992, and that didn't do any good either. If the legislature wants to get money, it will do it by stopping the money to getting into the transportation fund lockbox before it arrives there. So I'm skeptical about how effective a lockbox will be. I'm afraid it's a setup for getting the people to approve things like tolls, which are not needed, which hopefully you'll give me another question, and I'll get into that in more depth if you'll allow me to. But thank you very much.
I'm always excited when a referendum's on the ballot, because I like when people have a voice in the decisions that are made. So that's encouraging to me. In terms of the lockbox, I do support it. I think that our transportation has become a public safety issue. For those of us in the room that remember the Mianus River Bridge collapse, we cannot let something like that happen again in this state. So we really need to be addressing the problem. It's also an economic problem. Unless we have good transportation in this state, then it doesn't attract businesses here. It really affects us. So for those reasons, we really do need to take this issue seriously. And I think that it's time to stop playing politics about it. I think we put the facts out there, we let the people vote, and that's the way you decide these things. I really think that we have a special transportation fund for a reason, because it is something that affects the quality of life for all of us. And we have to keep the public safe, safe, fix our roads, and make sure that we're in line with our surrounding states. Thank you.
Next question is from Matt to Mary.
Connecticut's abortion laws are viewed as among the most liberal in the country, but they are not locked in by the state's constitution. If Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, what should the state do regarding a woman's right to choose?
Unequivocally, a woman has the right to choose. A woman has the right to make decisions about her body, about her medical care, her health care, that should not be interfered with by the government. If the government can tell you when you can't have a baby, they can tell you when you can have a baby, that is not the way it should be. Women have a sovereign right over their own bodies. So I would very much defend that right at any time. I think that it's really frightening to me to see what's happening on the federal level, and I do appreciate the fact that we have state laws to protect that, and I would do whatever I could to make sure that that stays in place, because I think that women deserve that. They deserve that kind of respect and autonomy to know that they can make decisions about what happens to them and their health without it being interfered upon. There've even, all of the little measures too to try to interfere with that, to try to limit it or put up roadblocks to it. It's just not right. So I would fight any of those also to make sure that a woman has equal and unfeathered access to any kind of health-related services that are available. Thank you.
Thank you. I regard every abortion as a tragedy for the mother. I regard
Please
it
hold
as
your applause until the end of the debate.
I regard it actually as a double tragedy, a tragedy for the mother and a tragedy for the child that she's carrying. I don't expect that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned, but if it is overturned, the only thing you can do is pass laws that would be respected by the public. And at this point in time, I don't think any kind of wholesale outlawing of abortions is practical or likely at all. In fact, even before Roe v. Wade, abortion was practiced, but it was restricted in certain ways. And one thing I think that I did introduce in the last session that I'd be interested in introducing again would be the, with respect to abortion for teenagers, 13 and 14 and 15-year-old girls without parental notice even. Connecticut is a state that has no parental requirement at all. Massachusetts and Rhode Island do. And in fact, we had a legislator from Rhode Island come here to testify because children from Rhode Island were traveling across the border to Connecticut. I'm talking about 13 and 14 and 15-year-old girls.
We'll squeeze in one last question. Tom, if you have one for Len.
Okay. Boy. All right.
Transportation or what?
Well, no. Well, why don't we shift to
Economic
workforce? And I mean, business is astounded, frankly, at the apparent lack of coordination in the state between education, workforce agencies, and business. In fact, the availability of a skilled workforce is a major challenge to the manufacturing sector. This is what I'm hearing. And we will lose these jobs to other states if we don't find a way to provide it. I would like to know how you might restructure the state government to ensure a better pipeline, and do you support releasing the $51 million in bond funds for this project under the Public Act 18178 adopted in the last session of the legislature?
That's me, right? Yes, there is a problem in the state with respect to the labor force. Connecticut's a state that's been well known for its education and for the workforce skills that we've had. Unfortunately, over the last 30 years, because of policies like NAFTA, a lot of the skilled workforce has left the state, and we haven't replaced it. Now, with Pratt & Whitney, United Technologies, General Dynamics, and Sikorsky getting large government military contracts, there's a demand that's increasing, and they're not finding the people here in the state that can fulfill those highly skilled positions. So they're starting to go out of state, which is a tragedy in some ways, but in another way, it's not such a bad thing because it'll reverse the outflow, the exodus from the state. if employers start hiring everybody they can that lives here in Connecticut, and they still have to reach out of state to replenish their workforce and to expand the workforce, that may be a good thing for Connecticut, because we need more taxpayers and more people who are earning a decent wage to sustain our way of life. And again, one of the things that's been hurting us for the last 10 years or so has been the exodus of taxpayers and who had high incomes and being replaced by people with lower incomes. So I fully support whatever we can do to address, and one of the things would be the technical high schools, I think, and working with the community colleges who have also a good program regarding industrial skills and the industrial workforce.
I agree that education is key to keeping our workforce here, and I've been talking with a lot of the building trades and the other trades, and they are very much interested and have excellent programs in terms of training people. We need to continue our technical school support, and I would be in favor of that bonding. I think that the workforce pipeline apprenticeship program that's gone through to create like 10,000 good-paying jobs in manufacturing and healthcare and the trades, those are the kind of things we need to be moving forward with. Unfortunately, again, I have to mention that in the Republican budget that Senator Suzio voted for, it was one of the highest cuts ever to all of those kind of programs, especially higher education, to the point that people in those higher education offices felt that it would devastate the programs. So I don't know how you can say that you support education and that you want to work for those things and at the same time vote for a budget that decimates them. I would not do that.
That'll conclude the portion for the 13th Senate. Thank you to our candidates. We'll now transition to the 82nd district, if those candidates.
Are we going to do our closing remarks?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Now or at the end?
Yeah, we'll do the closing remarks now. So each candidate will get 90 seconds for closing remarks, starting with Mary.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you to the Record Journal, Midstate Chamber of Commerce, and the Meriden Public Schools for sponsoring this debate. Thank you, Senator Suzio, and all of you for being here. Tonight, we discussed many of the challenges that our state faces. I love this state. I'm optimistic that we will overcome these challenges if we elect people who stand up for our values. As we continue to watch the cautionary tale taking place in Washington, D.C., we will decide our state's future. Elections have consequences. This election more so than many consequences in my lifetime. The choice between myself and Senator Suzio is clear. I offer a vision that reflects the values of our community, relieving the tax burden on working people, strengthening our economy with good-paying jobs and a quality of life that keep people here and attract people to our state, providing quality education for our children in schools that are safe, and protecting our environment and the rights of our citizens. These are things I value. I entered this race because I believe that the people of the 13th District deserve a state senator who will fight for these values and be a voice that truly reflects who we are as a community. I'm grateful to all of you who have taken the time to be here tonight and who are watching this broadcast. Participation in our democracy is how we keep it healthy. I'm confident that you all will vote, and I ask that you encourage everyone you know to vote. Call, send a text, write a note, knock on a door, so that every voice is heard. And lastly, I ask for your vote. I would be honored to be your state senator. Thank you.
I would like to begin by saying thank you to tonight's sponsors of the event. But in particular, I want to thank the constituents of the 13th Senate District for the honor of representing you in Hartford these last, for the last 2 years. During my last 2 years, I successfully led the fight on a number of bills. We stopped that crazy idea called the mileage tax. We stopped the installation of tolls. We passed legislation to help immigrant children abandoned by their parents. We passed legislation to help children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But being a lawmaker is only partly about making laws. Much of it is in the form of constituent service, and it's something we emphasize in my office. Earlier this year, I took on utilities for overcharging electric customers. Tonight, I am pleased to announce that Pura, a few days ago, issued a proposed ruling that will change billing procedures at the electric companies to avoid these mistakes from happening again. I told Pura that I expect the cost of the changes not to be passed on to consumers, and I'm happy to report that they've agreed to that too. The utilities will absorb the expenses themselves. During the course of the proceedings, I came to learn that Pura does not have the authority to order restitution for overcharges, and I'm going to seek that as my first legislative priority next year, to make certain that Pura can order restitution for overcharges of electric customers. I hope that you will return me as an advocate for you in the legislature next year. I promise you I will fight any tax increases to imbalance the budget, and I will do my very best to advocate for you and fight for you as hard as I have these last 2 years. Thank you for the honor of representing you in Hartford.
Sorry about that. Now we'll transition to the 82nd House race. I also want to point out, as you notice, we don't have the 84th race up here. That's because Representative Hilda Abercrombie is running unopposed.
Hilda Santiago.
I mean, Hilda Santiago is running unopposed. I think I did see Hilda here a little bit earlier.
She's in the back, right there.
She's in the back. So certainly any of her constituents who want to talk with her, she's in the back. But that's why she's not up here.
Yeah, right. It flew by.
So now we have the 82nd House race. We have Representative Buddy Altobello, who was first elected in 1994. He served 12 terms in the House. He is currently the Assistant Deputy Speaker, and he sits on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, the General Law Committee, and the Transportation Committee. He is running against the Republican nominee, Ernestine Holloway, who most recently ran for mayor last year, and she's seeking her first elected office.
Here's a clean one.
As with the 13th Senate race, we flipped a coin to see the order. Ernestine won, but she deferred, so Buddy will go first. I think we're back to Tom.
I think he's next. No? Yep.
Yeah, I think we're back to Tom. So your first question for Buddy.
Okay. As a member of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding, General Law, and Transportation Committees, you have a special insight into the problems that the state is currently facing with respect to its budget and its transportation issues. Once again, this is the big elephant in the room: is the budget gap. What are the challenges and opportunities that you see, and where do you see reductions in expense or increases in revenue to close the current budget gap?
Thank you very much, Tom. Yes, I've served on the Finance Committee for 24 years now. And the Finance Committee actually puts together the tax package after the Appropriations Committee puts together the spending package. Hopefully, they will meet at the same number. It doesn't always work that way. Moving forward, we do have a gap in this next biennium, which totals in the 2 years about $4.6 billion. But in Connecticut, we have a constitutional, not an amendment, it's in our Constitution that we have to put forth a balanced budget. So if we can somehow solve the $2 billion in the first year, the second year becomes only $600 million. People try to add those together all the time, but now where do we cut $2 billion, or where do we raise revenue of that ilk? It's going to be very difficult. Sure, we can do some sports betting. We're looking at maybe $30 million. People talk about legalizing marijuana, which the legislature has not been prone to do, but that might be $50 million full-blown. So it's obvious that we have to stop doing some things, and we need to look at some different types of revenue streams, although our revenue is doing much better. We finished last year with our withholding was 5.6% increase. This year it's 10.6% so far. We've got $1.2 billion in the rainy day fund as we speak, and things are heading well. It looks like we're going to finish this year with $2 billion in the rainy day fund. So things are starting to roll along, and look forward to the challenge.
Thank you. Can you repeat that question, please? Can you repeat the
And
question,
the
please?
the question is, where do you see the opportunities for budget reductions in expense or increase in revenue in order to balance the budget gap?
First of all, Connecticut doesn't have a money issue. We have a spending issue. If we stop spending and buying things that we don't need, we can make the budget. We have to take a look at, why do we have 3 types of boards for the colleges? Everybody else has SUNY and CUNY. Why do we need 3? We need to cut some of those big guys that are making some of that money and put it back into our college fund. What I don't understand is I hear Ms. Altobello talk about was marijuana. Well, you know, Colorado thought it was a good idea too, until the black market opened up, and they have more teenagers on marijuana that are ODing on it than anything. So that's not our option. Then we talk about betting. So then you're going to open up addiction. People are going to be in there spending their money that they don't have, trying to make $1 out of 15 cents that don't work. And so then you create a new fellowship, addiction, people that are addicting to gambling. So
Time. Sorry,
Okay.
time's up.
That's all right.
We'll now move on. Matt, your question for Ernestine?
If the governor comes forward with any plan to raise taxes, would you support it?
Absolutely not. That's my answer.
No, you have, I don't know if you want to keep going to your answer to the last question, then you have another minute 20.
Well, what I will say is this. Here's what we got to do. We got to tighten our belt. I run a nonprofit, and guess what? If I ran my business the way that the government run theirs, I'd have been bankrupt a long time ago. So what we got to do is cut back on some of the programs that don't work. Cut back on the studies. It costs $50,000 a study. How much more studying do we need? We know what works. I was listening to Lynn Suzio and Mary Abrams talk about transportation. Why don't we fix the buses where people can go to work, where people can get to other cities? Buses running here at 4:30 and it's over, and at 6 o'clock no more transportation. Who's gonna move here if we don't have a transit system that works? The train station is beautiful, but I went down there, I only see 5 people get on it. So what was the process? Yeah, bonding. I hear people talking about bonding, but bonding is still your tax dollars. It may not come from the city, it may come from the state or the federal government, but guess what? It's still your money, and we need to spend it correctly. And if we spent it correctly, like I run my business, it will work. I'm done.
Buddy?
Thank you very much, Matt. The one thing we're all certain of in this room is that we will have a new governor come January. And come the first Wednesday in February, the governor will propose to us a budget for the biennium of the 2 years. Whether or not it's going to include tax increases or revenue enhancements or whatever people try to call them these days, and try to avoid the tax word, the T word, I don't know. It really depends on who the next governor is. It depends on whether the next governor is honest with the people of Connecticut and puts forth an honest budget. We had one year where we had a governor propose a budget that was $1.7 billion off. It didn't match up, and the governor wouldn't admit it for months and months. So the old adage that the governor proposes and the legislature disposes of the budget, I think, may come into play then, and we'll see what happens.
Tom, your next question for Buddy?
Okay. The 691 Route 15 interchange in Meriden is a local example of a severe transportation problem that should be corrected. But it's on hold now due to lack of funding. Do you support tolls or further increases in gasoline tax and the STF ballot initiative to create a lockbox, or would you propose to cancel these projects?
All 4 questions in 90 seconds? Oh, yeah. Thanks, Tom. The I-691 9115 project is not on hold. It is moving forward. The last bond commission meeting, there was additional design monies put forward, and I agree with you, since I live right in that area, that it is horrible over there. The good news is that the the Commissioner of Transportation also travels that road and on his way home from a place up north to Cheshire, and cannot get through there even on a Sunday afternoon, which everybody knows is not the time where we expect that sort of thing. Design is on the way. The preliminary indications are it'll cost $91 million. I think with some bridge relocation it's going to cost a lot more, but it is one of the #1 priorities. It moved ahead right out of the chute above everything else, and actually it's really, really needed so that we can get our goods and services, employees and people in and out of Meriden.
Ernestine?
I'd like to sit down and talk to the transportation person. I've been trying to get a hold to him for the last 2 years. I'd like to ask him, and I'll reiterate what I said. It's nice that you want to build more bridges, and it's interesting that you want to put tolls, but how about taking care of what we already got? Why don't we go back to where we had the trains coming through, you know, that can transport things? Why don't we fix what we already got? If we did that, it would be less congested in the cities. At nighttime when you sleep in, and the rail carts would go by with everything in it, because that's what they used to do. We have an interesting system here. Why not put it back to work? $91 million of taxpayers' money is going to take a long time to fix what they're trying to do. I propose putting it on hold until we can get a balanced budget. One thing, but he did say that was correct. We're going to get a new governor. And
Time. Matt, your next question for Ernestine?
Yep. Today's students were born into a post-Columbine world where school shootings have become an ongoing concern. How can Connecticut help students feel safe in public schools?
I don't think banning everybody guns is the answer. I think that we need to take a look at what other people do around the country. New York City has, because I grew up in their school system, they have school safety. They have a division that's allocated just for the school system. What they do is, they do the things that the officers that used to be in the schools do. They walk around, they make sure that there's fights, they check the exits. One resource officer per school just doesn't work. They need to have a separate entity that's going to work with all the schools across Connecticut, you know, where they can interact with the students. They can find out what the gangs are. Students talk. Everybody can't talk to one officer. One officer per school, I'll say it again, it just doesn't work. So why not create something where you put 3 and 4 in a school, and the state and the city take a partnership in it, because it's both our responsibility. You know, I would love to live in a world that nobody killed each other. Unfortunately, we have a lot of criminals that like to kill each other. So I propose that we bring in school safety.
Buddy?
Thank you. I can't imagine a state that's more sensitive to school safety than Connecticut, given what happened several years ago. The legislature and the governor, and on a very bipartisan basis, has put forth monies for school safety projects in schools throughout Connecticut. Small towns, big towns, everybody was awarded grants. The schools that we have now are safer than they've ever been. Some schools require additional public safety officers inside the school. Some find it's beneficial. Even the smallest communities I've been reading about find it extremely beneficial to have a resource officer in the school and interact with the children and older children and kids on a day-to-day basis. I think that's really strong, and it builds a strong rapport with those police officers moving forward. So the other part of that is that the legislature has addressed, although we could always do better, is the mental health aspect and students' health. And I thank you.
Sorry.
Did we get the rebuttal?
No, sorry.
You started.
That is true.
Before we get to Tom's next question, I wanted to get to a reader-submitted question. This comes from Judy Cupstis. We'll direct this to Buddy. Judy expressed concern about homeowners that are leaving the state due to high taxes. So, Buddy, how can the state provide relief to these homeowners who are worried about high taxes and are thinking about leaving the state?
Thank you, Judy. There are two tax streams that are perhaps included in that question, and I don't know the details on it. One is the local property tax, and one is the tax on, say, income tax and sales tax in the regular general fund revenue stream. The property tax is the biggest tax by far of the municipalities, the cities and towns. It makes up in some cases 75 or 80 or 90% of the revenue. In larger cities and cities that don't have as much local wealth, the revenue stream is much less than 50%. If we were to, say, cut state grants to cities like Meriden and towns like Middlefield, the local property tax rate would have to go up or severely curtail services. And vice versa is true. There's no magic bullet here. Someone has to pay. Are we more expensive than other states? In some areas, yes, we are, and we can work on that, and I hope to work on that in this next legislature. As far as people moving in and moving out, that happens all the time. Fortunately, we have many thousands of jobs that are coming online and are online. Employers are looking for 30,000 people as we speak in Connecticut, and our unemployment rate dropped down another notch to 4.2. Heading in the right direction, and I thank you.
Ernestine?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The question, again, came from Judy Cupstis, who expressed concern about homeowners who are leaving the state because of high taxes. So the question is, how can the state provide relief to homeowners who are worried about taxes and considering leaving?
We could stop taxing them to death. That's what we can do. And we can also, don't clap because you throw me off. Please don't do that.
Yeah, please hold applause to the end.
What we can also do is, I'm like a loss, the clapping just. What we can also do is change the parties that are in power. The Democrats have been in over Connecticut a very long time. And it's a lot of their programs that have put this burden on the tax people. The programs have failed, they don't work. So maybe the voters, you're the blame for this. You put them in there. So maybe we need to rethink who we put in office. When you have a party that's been in office for so long, it's like a totalitarian rule. So maybe if we cut the totalitarian rule, we'll be able to fix this.
Okay. So now we'll turn back to our panelists. Matt, your next question is for Ernestine.
Yep. Drug addiction rates remain a problem in the state, as evidenced by the Chief Medical Examiner's projection last month that deaths from a drug overdose will remain relatively flat in 2018. How should the legislature address substance abuse in the state?
I just want to let everybody know I have 27 years in recovery. And I need this state to be honest and stop putting stuff underneath the rug. When we talk about opioids and we don't talk about heroin, then we have a heroin crisis. I think that we need to go to the schools when the kids are younger. I think we need to get to them in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And I say that because that's when I started drinking alcohol, in the 4th grade, and smoking cigarettes in the 4th grade. I think that we need to bring people in recovery with clearance into classes to speak to students and let them know that there is a better way. If you want to hang out when you want to get older and you want to party, you can hang out and party and have a good time and not be a drunk and not be on drugs. And also, we need to balance how we handle opioids, because there are some people that actually need it to survive, and my daughter just happens to be one of them because she's a brain injury. But so she's caught up in this drug addiction thing, and she's not an addict. So we need to balance it fair. We need to go to the doctors. We need to go to parents. Because I know I'm in my child's business. I want to know what's in that room. I want to know what you got in your pocket. So we have to do better parenting also. It's not always the government. Sometimes it starts right in your home. Get in your child's business. And then when they get to school and they have it, we need to bag them. You carrying drugs within the... Okay.
Buddy?
Thank you. I think I heard that the projections were leveling off. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's better news than we have had. I mean, we've had to hire more coroners. Actually, our coroner department lost accreditation for a while because they just didn't have the resources to do the autopsies necessary because of the opioid and mostly fentanyl-related overdoses. The legislature has done, over the last 5 or 6 years actually, things through the pharmacies and allocated monies for treatments, and for a while there it looked like we were losing more ground and more ground. Nice to hear that we've leveled off, but even one death is one too many, and we need to continue our efforts and redouble so that this tragedy doesn't strike families and our friends again and again. Thank you.
Tom, your next question for Buddy.
Okay. Well, I'd like an answer to this because I've heard some discussion about reduction of taxes, and I haven't heard any specifics on reduction of unnecessary expenses. So I'm asking you and both of you, what unnecessary expenses do you see in government specifically that should be cut, particularly if we're going to reduce taxes?
I'll give you the typical constituent answer: anything that doesn't directly affect me in a positive way. In other words, tax the other guy but leave my programs alone. This is not the easiest thing this will not be the easiest thing to do. It's never been a very easy thing, except in the go-go years of the 90s and 2000s, when on the Finance Committee over a several-year period we were able to cut out $2.2 billion annually out of the tax revenue structure. 2.2. I'm talking about 15, 16, 18 years ago we were able to do that. If we were to get some sort of boom like that again, we would be fine and the money would just be rolling in. But we don't expect that. We see things on the uptick. So it's going to be a combination of things, and it's going to be a heck of a fight, one way or the other, up or down, with a whole new governor, and we don't know who that's going to be. Right now it's a big question mark, but we'll get through it. The Constitution says we have to, and if I'm up there, I'll be in there fighting. Thank you.
Ernestine?
I have some ways that we can cut spending. Bring the college system under SUNY and CUNY. Get rid of the third one. We don't, and everybody says, why do you want to do that? Well, that'll cut some CFOs, CEOs, whatever they call themselves these days, and put that money back. You know, every state has 2 systems, and I'm still trying to figure out why we have 3. We can go green. Put up solar panels. You know, cut some of this electricity. The schools don't need to be on, lights don't need to be on all night. You know, sometimes, my mother used to have a saying, it's the little foxes that kill the vine. And if we don't start with the little things, they become gigantic later on. And that's what happened with this. And I believe Bob Stefanowski, call me biased, will be our next governor. And I believe that the zero budget will work.
We have time for one more question. Matt, your question for Ernestine.
Yeah, do you support legalization of sports betting and other expansions in gambling, such as a third casino?
Absolutely not. That's my answer. No. All we're going to create is more addictive. We're going to need more addictive programs. We're going to have more people drinking because they done betted all their money that they need to pay their bills with. And we're going to create more social problems, just like marijuana. We legalize it. Yeah, we may get revenue, but guess what? There's a new fellowship called Marijuana Anonymous. And there is one for people that gamble too. And I'm pretty sure they got a lot more chairs, but they would not like to add to their fellowship. So no, we don't need another casino. We got enough already.
Buddy?
Thank you. There's a question within that question. One is to open up to a competition statewide, which would break the compact that we have with our Indian tribes presently, or to favor a casino that the joint venture of the Indian tribes has put forward in East Windsor. That I supported. I'm not sure that I would support a casino other than run by our current compact holders, and they've been partners with us for many, many years, and I think they've run a good show, actually. The sports betting is something that is all around us and closing in, and I would be in favor of it. We've had a lot of discussions on that about how we could curtail that, especially among younger people, and especially over the internet, which is going to be very, very difficult, and especially with the use of late night and credit cards, and there are a lot of possibilities for abuse and addiction, and that's why we actually didn't get it done this year. We couldn't figure that out properly.
We now move to the closing arguments. Each of the candidates will get 90 seconds, starting with Buddy.
Thank you very much to all the sponsors and to all of you who came out this evening. It's more than I expected, so that's terrific. I've been honored and privileged to serve our community for the last 31 years as an elected official. During those years, I've been attentive to my duties on your behalf, listening to your concerns, reading bills, and when I was on city council, and resolutions, and authoring local legislation, and finally being there to vote for you. During those 31 years of service, I have not missed one city council meeting or house session. Not a one. I would call that being attentive to my duty. This past year alone, I was personally successful in securing generous portions of project funds, working with the administration to secure more than $11 million in extra funding for crucial local projects. By the way, that's about 290 times my annual stipend. So I guess I work cheap. But with your continued support, I pledge to represent the wishes and needs of Meriden, Middlefield, and Rock Fall to the best of my abilities. Tonight I ask you again for your vote. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thank you. This debate was very interesting and enlightening. I want to say thank you to the Record Journal, to the other people that are here. I will say this. He's been in there 31 years too long. I think that we need a fresh new set of eyes, and I have two of them. I believe that we've been doing this for too long. I think that we just need fresh new people. I'm not going to take away from what they have and have not done, but I do know this. I've been here 12 years, and I've been all through Meriden, and I've yet to see my opponent at anything in Meriden. I'm a hands-on person, so you better believe anything happening in our schools, anything happening around Meriden, Rock Fall, and Middlefield, I'm hands-on. I promise you I'll be there. I'm going to be popping up like popcorn. I also want to say that I'm active when it comes to the Board of Education and coming around and see what works and what doesn't work. I think that there needs to be a partnership that I don't see anymore. I also believe that I've been in ministry 40 years. I've worked at the Board of Ed. I'm a community activist. I'm a domestic violence activist. And I'm a senior activist. So now that I already do the job in Meriden, I want to spread that around and get the title because I think I've earned it. And so I believe that if you vote for me, I will represent the people because I think that they forgot about the small guy, and I won't.
Thank you to our candidates in the 82nd District. We now transition to the 83rd District. Actually has 3 candidates, so if you excuse us for just one moment, there's some logistics we have to work out here on stage. This seat, the 83rd District, is currently held by Kathy Abercrombie, who was first elected in a 2005 special election. She's the Democratic nominee once again. She's currently the chair of the Human Services Committee. She also sits on the Appropriations Committee and the Energy and Technology Committees. The other candidates in this race are the Republican nominee, Lou Arata, and we have the Libertarian nominee, Roger Mishback. These candidates actually drew straws since we have 3 of them. So the order for the questions are going to go Roger first, Kathy second, then Lou third, and then we will rotate the order in terms of who goes first. I think we're back to the top with Tom. Your first question goes
and we're back to the top with our question, and that is that this session's going to be dominated by the budget deficit. So what specific or programs would you propose to eliminate or revenue that you would propose to raise to close this massive deficit?
And that goes to Roger.
Okay. Well, we definitely can't raise any more revenue because raising taxes will just kill growth in this state even more than it is now. There's a lot of things that can be cut that don't affect people. For instance, $1 million or $2 million that the representatives up in Hartford spend to send mail out to the constituents can be cut. Things like that have to go. But it's about 10% we have to cut out of this budget, and that'll allow us to reduce taxes a little bit and maybe bring some growth back to Connecticut.
We now go to Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I sit on appropriations, so I do the budget. And I have to tell you that one of the areas that we have looked at, and under the CBAC agreement, I think that you're going to see some major adjustments in the agency's budgets, is overtime. So what's going on right now is under the CBAC agreement that was put forth, state employees that are hired after July 1st no longer are guaranteed their jobs. So what we're looking at through the agencies is hiring entry-level employees to come in to reduce the overtime, which means it reduces their budgets, which means they don't need as much in their budgets. That's one of the areas that I think that we can start to close this gap. There isn't any magic bullet out there, folks. There isn't one answer that's going to help us get out of this deficit. But I think that the steps that we've put in place are going to get us to a better place.
And then lastly, we go to Lou.
Thank you. I think that my focus really is on reducing waste, corruption, mismanagement. I think that since 1991, the size of our government has grown 71% more than the rate of inflation. And I think that we have a balloon in spending. Tom Scott said in '91 when Lowell Weicker wanted to put the state income tax in, and he said that, you know, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And I think that we need to reward people that are whistleblowers, people that have ideas on how to do jobs better, increase productivity, and decrease the size of the bureaucracy. Zero balance budgeting is something that Bob Stefanowski has proposed, and if you really think about it and you start from the bottom and work your way up instead of saying that you have $10 billion and how are we going to divide that up and how are we going to spend it. Suppose you take those necessary services, the human services, and start with those, the safety net programs that we really need to take care of each other, start there and then work up the pyramid instead of working from the top down. I think that's pretty important. And I think we need to think outside the box, and we cannot keep going on with what's been going on for 40 years in one-party control. I think we need checks and balances, and we haven't had that. It's been absent for way too long, and if we were actually going to have...
Time. Our next question comes from Matt. It'll be directed first to Kathy.
Yeah, another budget question. If the next governor comes forward with any plan to raise taxes, would you support it?
I would have to see what his proposal is. I'm not going to sit here and commit one way or another because I think that's a little naive to put the cart before the horse. I think we need to look at what the proposal would be. I think that you know, human services, I chair human services, and that's an area that has been cut time and time again. And I don't want to live in a state that doesn't take care of their people. We have fixed costs that we have no choice about. But the human services is cut every time because people out there in the legislature don't see their faces, don't know their names. I do. So I don't want to see the human services cut anymore.
We now go to Lou. Oh, hold on, Lou. We should have a minute instead of a minute 30 on the clock.
I'll take the minute 30. Could you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, if the next governor came forward with a plan to raise taxes, would you support it?
Okay. No, I would not support raising taxes unless we have turned over every single stone in Hartford. I think that we have, how many times have you all heard people say that in the fourth quarter business goes up because people are spending their budgets, because if they don't spend their budget, they're not going to get the same amount of money next year. And I think that that sort of status quo type of thinking has helped create a ballooned bureaucracy that we're trying to now come to grips with and figure out how to control it. And I think that, again, going back to Bob Stefanowski, he did his financial plan in conjunction with the Pew Charitable Trust, and together they came up with a plan that I don't write algorithms, I'm not a mathematician, but it's something that I could understand, and I really think that, or I hope that, all of you would take some time and read his plan as well, because there is a lot of waste and redundancy that can be cut. Now, specifically...
Time.
You wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's plenty of places to cut out of the budget that won't affect the social services, which Kathy's correct, have to be protected. That's one area that we can not only keep our investment in, but actually make our investment better to really help people get back on their feet that need it. But there's plenty of waste in the budget that we can find the 10% we need.
Now we go to
Who's next?
Tom with a question for Lou.
Okay, small business is particularly affected by mandates, taxes, and increasing expenses. And generally, the largest expenditure for business is wages. The minimum wage went to $10.10 in 2017, and now there's some proposals to increase it to $15 per hour. Would you support a further increase? And the setting seems to be arbitrary. Should it be indexed to COLA?
Well, first off, we have 9,000 business regulations in the state of Connecticut. And I don't believe that the minimum wage is the barometer, pardon me, getting over a cold. I don't believe it's the barometer that really we should be using as the stick in front of the horse. I think what we need to do is look at what the expenses are on someone's business. We need to support growing small businesses because they're the quickest and fastest, best job creators the state can have. For us to talk about what an entry-level wage would be, you're going to be adding on more expenses to the small businesses, which are actually the quickest way to increase job growth in the state. So I think that going to $15 an hour, even though it's popular in some areas of the country, I don't think that's beneficial for us. I think that perhaps where we're at now is something that could be flatlined for a while, and let's get our state budget under control and our state spending under control, reduce the size of our government, make our government more productive and more responsive. We always hear about the budget cuts are going to be the football teams on a municipal level or the art program, and you never hear about the administrators being put on the block. And I think that for us to have
Time. Sorry. Roger?
Oh, same thing.
Same question. Do you need it repeated?
Yes, please.
Oh yes, it's the question of the minimum wage, increasing minimum wage from $10.10 to $15 per hour proposal, and should it be indexed to COLA?
The free market's a wonderful thing. The free market will grow wages on its own if we let it. The regulations and mandates that this state puts not only on municipalities that hurt them, but on businesses themselves, really restrict us from growing business. We reduce those, wages will grow, but having the state set a minimum wage to $15 an hour is only going to hurt one group of people. It's actually going to hurt our teenagers, because at that point, why would you hire a teenager for $15 an hour when there would be somebody else to take that job? So those entry-level jobs will go away. That work experience that they can get goes away, and we actually make a problem worse than make anything better. We need to let the free market come back to Connecticut, let the free market work the way it's supposed to be.
I am in favor of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I believe that in this community, which is a very diverse community, that everybody has the right to a living wage. I believe that people have the right to be able to have to only work one job. Do you know what it's like in this community and how many of our families work 2, 3 jobs because they're not making ends meet? The quality of life is what is at stake here if people are not making a decent wage. So yes, I am in favor of raising the minimum wage.
Next question comes from Matt, and we're back to, I think, Roger going first.
What should the scope of the state's transportation infrastructure projects be? Should we aim for first in class like Governor Malloy has stated in the past, or should we rein in expectations due to affordability costs? And what should our priorities be when it comes to transportation spending?
To the last question, a lot of people have to work 2 jobs because we have to pay the taxes in this state. So that one of the things we have to do about transportation is control the cost of what it costs us to pave a mile of road. We're actually 3 times higher than most municipalities in the whole country. Once we get that under control, our budget will then be able to be stretched farther. Obviously, if we could do 3 miles of road rather than 1 mile of road, we can get to those projects quicker. We look at things on a big scope like the 691 interchange there to redesign the whole thing, but in the short term, if we just added an exit-only lane onto 691 coming southbound, that would alleviate a lot of the traffic going on to 691 in the afternoon. We need to start looking at little things like that, obviously, because we don't have the money in Hartford to do anything. We're broke. We have massive budget deficits. We already borrowed all the money we can borrow in Connecticut. So as far as transportation is, we have to prioritize the projects that could be done now or need to be done now, and maybe instead of full-scale projects like ripping all the bridges and things down, take little pieces of it and go forward.
Kathy, I think, is next.
I shouldn't have sat in the middle.
Thank you. Can you, I'm sorry, can you just repeat that question? I just want to make sure I understood all the parts of it.
Yeah, no problem. What should the scope of the state's transportation infrastructure projects be? Should we aim for first in class like Governor Malloy has stated in the past, or should we rein in expectations due to affordability costs? And what should our priorities be when it comes to transportation spending?
So I think that transportation is not an option. I think it's a public safety issue. We don't have a choice whether we fix our bridges or don't. We already had a crisis once in this state because we did not fix a bridge. So I think that we have to prioritize them, absolutely. But it's not an option, folks. We have a responsibility as government to make sure that people are safe. And we can prioritize them. Transportation is expensive. Fixing roads and bridges is expensive, but we don't have a choice.
I think it's important that we look at how we spend our money. And the state of Connecticut gets over $750 million per year for not having tolls. And the fact that that money doesn't go 100% into infrastructure projects, that's a fault of the legislature and the administration. We also spend over $99,000 for administrative costs per mile of highway in this state. The national average is $10,800. And what are we doing so unique, so specific, so special that we have to spend 9 times the amount of money for our administrative costs? I think that's where we really need to focus, is how big our government is, why do we have so many people, and how much redundancy is there. And I think we can cut a lot of that. And I think everything needs to be put on the table. Obviously, logically, we have safety issues, we have decaying structure. These things have to be repaired. We have services that we have.
What's the...
On the statement about the 750 million?
Actually, I'm going to jump in. I have a reader question, which is related to this, so there'll be an opportunity to counter that. We have a question from Colleen Sear, who actually wanted to ask about tolls, so it seems like a perfect time to piggyback off of Matt's question. She wants to know, how does Connecticut pay for transportation initiatives? And if you don't support tolls, what alternatives do you propose? And we actually start with you, Kathy.
Okay. Thank you. So as being your representative, over the last 4 years, I have sent out 2 surveys about the toll issue. And I have to tell you, the response that I have gotten from my constituents is that 70% of you are in favor of tolls. It's my job to represent you. So that's why I would be in favor of tolls. As far as the $750 million that my opponent was talking about, that money, $750 million, is only a small portion of what we need on a yearly basis for our transportation projects. We average about $2.2 billion every year that has to be put aside for projects. An average project takes 10 years from beginning to end. And I think that if we do tolls, I was somebody that voted against the lockbox issue when it first came out 4 years ago. This year I voted for it because my hope is, with doing tolls, we can put that money into the lockbox, and then we don't have to take $300 million out of the general fund to put into transportation. We have to fund our transportation. It is a public safety issue, and I don't want to see it come out of the general fund, because then we could pay for education cost sharing. We could take care of our seniors with our programs. So yes, I am in favor of tolls.
We now go to Lou.
I think that's consistent with the tax and spend philosophy that you, my opponent Kathy, that you have taken in voting in 98% of the time with the Democrat majority and Dan Malloy. And I think there's a problem with one-party control. And this isn't really about the transportation fund and how many dollars are shifted from one fund to another fund or one project to another. All of these issues are like a cake, and every cake is made of layers, and every layer is different. And what goes into the layers, there's a lot of different things in those too. So you can't answer one question specifically with one answer, because there's so many other variables that come into the equation. So I think that the whole toll proposal is more taxing. It's a commuter tax, and I think we have to do a better job, and I'm going to be one of the people elected to go to Hartford in the freshman class that's going to...
Time. Sorry. Roger.
One of the interesting things about tolls is that part of the people that would pay them would be out-of-state people traveling through our state. Obviously, we get a lot of that going to Rhode Island, Massachusetts, up north. So while I was originally against tolls, after a trip to Tennessee and seeing that the people who paid taxes in Tennessee were the people visiting because their sales tax is so high. So I kind of rethought it, and I said, well, obviously we don't need to add revenue. We need to keep the revenue where we are. But one thing tolls could do for us is they could reduce our gas tax, they could reduce our property tax, and they could reduce the costs we have in registering cars. So I would go for tolls if we were to eliminate property taxes on cars and gas taxes.
Before we get to the next question, please just hold any remarks to the end. The candidates will be here if you would like to talk with them after, but please allow them to make their points without any interruptions. Tom, your next question for Lou.
Okay, because in this race we have a number of newcomers, or relative newcomers, I want each of you please determine tell us what experience capacity do you bring to address the current state budget crisis and the challenges that we're currently facing in the apparent likelihood of restructuring of state government that will be experienced over the next budget cycles.
Fantastic question. And the answer for me is that I'm 61 years old, and a life of experience and a life of many, many different career paths that I've taken. I had a good education. I'm a logical person. I'm an honest person. I'm endorsed by the Independent Party as well as the Republican Party, so I think I can reach out across the aisle and work with anyone. I believe really in policy over party. I believe that best practices are what we really should be seeking, and we need to get all heads to the table, and we're going to have disagreement, and disagreement is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But we need to listen to everybody to get to the best solution. And I think that the government is just too big. I think that lifelong politicians, I think term limits are a great idea, and I think that's something that maybe Connecticut should embrace. I think there are a lot of things we can do with our governance that needs to really come from the people, and the people need to get involved. The people need to do some homework and read on the internet, and for example, read everybody's financial plans and see what resonates with you. The more involvement we have, the more ideas we get, the more brains we have, the better solutions we're going to get. So I'm just going to say we have over 300 taxes here in Connecticut. That's way too many. I don't think we need to bring in any more taxation. We need to look at our spending, how we spend, and then prioritize. It's going to be tough, as Buddy said.
Roger.
I try to only spend what I have. I don't overspend my money. So taking taxpayers' money would be something that I'd respect to do the right thing with. As far as running the budget, like Lou says, there's over 364 taxes in Connecticut. We take one day off a year. Could be whatever holiday you want. Most of them only bring in $1.5 million in revenue. It costs us more to collect those taxes than we actually take in on those taxes. But at the same time of watching the fiscal side of the government up in Hartford, I'd also be on the side of the civil rights that Kathy protects so well. The nice thing about me is it doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or a Republican. Most of the time I disagree or agree with them.
Thank you for the question. So I think, first of all, I would like to just address a comment that was made by my opponent about being a tax and spend Democrat. Just for the record, folks, the last budget that we voted on was a bipartisan budget. What that means is that Democrats and Republicans sat in the room and worked together. As chair of Human Services, which I truly love and have been on Human Services my whole career, 95% of the bills that come out of my committee come out unanimously because I work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I don't sit here and pretend that I have all the answers. I try to educate myself by meeting with my constituents and getting on groups to understand the issues. I am part of the manufacturing caucus so that I can understand what the needs are of the people that we represent in this state. So I think to sit here and to say that the policies that I put forward have not been in the best interest of the people I represent here in Meriden is not a true statement.
We have time for one more question, so we go to Matt. You're directing this to Roger.
In the past few rounds of budget cuts, the elections, FOI, and ethics budgets were all cut. These program review functions are the watchdog agencies to help keep government honest and on track. Does it make sense to cut here? And would you support further reducing those budgets or restoring the money, or neither?
I would restore the money to those budgets because government transparency, obviously as a libertarian, we actually believe that's the most important thing for the people to be able to get the information they need or see what the government's actually doing. So that would be something I'd be for putting money back into.
Kathy?
So the reality is this: we have choices and hard choices that we have to make up in Hartford, and I do believe that we should have our watchdog agencies. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm going to put money in a watchdog agency over putting it in Human Services. That's the choices that we have to make, and they're difficult choices, but I'm not putting it over the people that I represent. Human Services is really important. Making sure that our seniors can age in place is expensive, but it's the right thing to do. So if there's money to be put back in, because I believe we should have them, sure, but I'm not going to do it at the expense of other agencies.
Would you read the question again, please?
Yep. In the past few rounds of budget cuts, the elections, FOI, and ethics budgets were all cut. These program review functions are the watchdog agencies to help keep government honest and on track. Does it make sense to cut here, and would you support further reducing those budgets, restoring the funding, or neither?
I would actually, I agree with having a watchdog. I think we all have worked better in the course of our working lives if we knew we had a supervisor that was keeping an eye on what we were doing. I think letting the fox alone in the hen house is a very, very poor idea. And I would just like to say that it's important for us to look at our government as all the people. We all have needs, but they all have to be paid for. And it's nice in a utopian existence to be able to take care of every need for every person by the government. But there's also personal responsibility. People need to step up and take care of their own, take care of themselves, make smart decisions. And the more that government is looked at to take care of all of the needs of all of the people, all of the time, I think that is disproportionate. And I'm also going to say that I think that we need to. Okay.
We now move to the closing arguments, and actually, first up is Kathy.
First of all, let me thank the sponsors of this event and for all of you being here tonight to listen to us. On November 6th, I ask for your vote. I believe that my record speaks for itself. Voting for a bipartisan budget. Everybody knows what's going on at the federal level. We don't have that at the state level, and I think that's something that we should all be proud of. I'm proud of the fact that as the chair of the Human Services, I try to protect those that are most vulnerable in this state. Whether it's our seniors or individuals with disabilities, that's my commitment to you, and I will continue that. I also have heard from my constituents about taxes. I'm very proud of the fact that starting in 19, that there's an exemption on the Social Security income, and that we are phasing out the taxes on the pensions and annuities. We're listening to you folks. We are trying to do the best that we can up there. So on November 6th, I would be honored to have your vote. Thank you.
So obviously you got three choices in this race. You can go Republican, Democrat. As great as Lou sounds, as great as Kathy sounds, they're going to follow their parties. I'm asking you to take a leap and go to a third party. I'm asking you to send a message to the two-party system. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers for what's going on in Hartford, but I will have people that can guide me. So I'm asking you to take that leap and vote for me. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Record Journal and the Midstate Chamber, Meriden Board of Ed for having us here, for all of you taking time out of your days to come and listen to this. Hopefully you've learned something about us. I'm going to be posting a lot of information on the internet after this because there's so much more that I have to say, and there's quite a bit that I disagree with that I've heard tonight. But I do want to say that during my campaign I came across a gentleman by the name of Anthony, and Anthony was telling me about the problems he's got with one neighbor that just packed up and moved to Florida, and the neighbor on the other side of him is thinking about packing up and doing the same thing very shortly. And Anthony he's on a fixed income, and he cannot withstand any more taxes. Otherwise, he's going to be joining the caravan going down south to a tax-free state. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to understand that the bureaucrats that have been in office up in Hartford have allowed this to happen. We need to change. It's time for a change. And we can't continue to do business and elect the same people and expect a different outcome. Kathy's had 14 years to change the fiscal outlook of the state, and she continues to spend, and that's fine. And Human Services is a very valued entity, and we need to continue funding that, absolutely. But we also have needs for everyone else in the state, and we need to keep people here and let people that are going to school have an opportunity that they can work, they can pay for where they live, and they want to stay here. Thank you very much.
That concludes our debate. One more time, thank you to all our panelists for coming out and answering our questions. Our candidates. Also to our panelists for their questions. Thank you all for attending. Hopefully you found this informative. Hopefully it helps you as you go to the voting booths. And please get out and vote on November 6th. Just a couple of points. We're taping this tonight, so video will be up on our website either later tonight or certainly by tomorrow morning.
Right.
We'll also have coverage in Saturday's Record Journal. So for those who couldn't be here, let them know that we'll have this up soon. Thank you.